The following is a Laura Flanders Show audio exclusive.
Elections are by their definition polarizing. Not that we're one happy family before, but every election year we see partisanship soar to new heights or depths, after which we, the people, are supposed to make nice with one another, and the elected officials who've just spent months disparaging their opponents get grief in the media for failing to agree. It's always bad, but today all these tendencies are worse. So, what can we learn from a woman who helps political people mediate their differences and social justice groups keep on track? In her new book, We Will Not Cancel Us, Adrienne Maree Brown describes how cancel culture is bad for people, organizations, and ultimately for the planet. It's also one of the easiest tools to grab in the toolbox we've inherited. And there's a reason for that. How do we deal with our differences differently? That's the question for Adrienne Maree Brown today. She joins us from Detroit to discuss this intimate and beautiful manifesto. Adrienne, welcome back to the Laura Flanders Show. So glad to have you.
Thank you, Laura. It's always a pleasure to get to talk with you. And you've been such a steady supporter and reader and engager of the work. So I'm really grateful.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful for you. As you mentioned, you've been on the show before, and at various times we've introduced you as a mediator, an abolitionist, an author, a pleasure activist.
Mhm.
I'd love you to introduce yourself this time. And then I'm going to ask you, how did you go from pleasure activism to cancel culture?
Great. So, yes, I'm Adrienne Maree Brown. I am a writer, and I am a movement facilitator and mediator. And what that means is about 24 years ago, I started noticing that whenever I was in a meeting, I was often the person who's like, oh, I think I have an agenda, or I think I can see a way forward. I think I'm synthesizing this information, and people started to hire me to do that. So as I got politicized into Black liberation, feminism, and anti-capitalism, and all the things that I believe in, the offer that I felt I could make towards the justice and liberation I believe in was to help hold the spaces, hold the conflicts, hold the vision, the visioning sessions, and like, how do we actually build the kind of relationships that allow us to practice what we most deeply believe in a way that invites more and more people to be like, oh, I think I want to be a part of that. I think that is a space where I too could belong and could make change. I think our radical responsibility in movements is to keep opening the door for people to realize this is not the only way. The way we're living right now is someone else imagined it, and it's unjust, and it's not sustainable, and we have to imagine other ways. And then I write, and I've always written, and it's trying to strike the balance between holding this role that's fairly neutral of trying to like be the facilitator while also having pretty strong opinions about certain things, and have a strong opinion that we have to imagine our way through this. I have a strong opinion that nature is one of our teachers, so emergent strategy has been a way that I've expressed that and practiced that. I have a strong opinion that, especially for those of us who have experienced oppression, we have to reclaim our right to experience pleasure, happiness, contentment, joy. Fundamentally, we have to be satisfiable, and we have to understand what that means on our terms rather than just what someone is willing to give us who still wants to keep a power dynamic in which we're not equal. So all of that brought us to this year. I went on sabbatical this year, and I came back, and what I noticed happening inside of movements, I'd seen it growing, but it felt like it leapt up, was a state of constantly calling each other out, calling for each other's cancellation, calling for pushing people out of the spaces. And I found myself perplexed. I was like, what's actually going on here? I've understood the power of call outs as a strategy that we use against those who have so much more power than us, and we can't reach them.
So when you
And
say call out, just to define it, that's when
yeah,
we
so
say you're just a racist jerk.
right. So the way that I experience it is often it's really putting out into the public sphere a statement or social media, missive or something like that that says this person is harmful or bad or abusive in this particular way. And sometimes the call out is just like, here's some demands. We want this person to apologize. We want this person to change their practices. Sometimes it is demands that have consequences or actions, associated with them. Like we want them to step down from power, or we want to see the power shift into other structures. And sometimes it's a call for cancellation, right? Which is like, we want to fully divest from this person. We don't want this person to be able to be hired or to have access to whatever spaces they've been in. And like I said, I think when there's great power differentials, this is a really brilliant strategy, right? Because it's like, I can't just call you on the phone. We're not in community. There's not a way for me to stop the harm. And so I think we've seen it in the public sphere, right? And R. Kelly, for instance, Harvey Weinstein, right? These are people who have had a lot of power, a lot of resources to keep perpetuating harmful and abusive dynamics. And then we come to movement. And inside of movement, we are not as comfortable talking about what all the different power dynamics are. And sometimes, especially inside of the nonprofit sphere, it can be very confusing to understand who actually has power, who doesn't. Social media, I think, has even confused it more. Like, if you have followers, do you have power? If you have a platform, do you have power? Alicia Garza has a new book out, which I keep pointing people to, called The Purpose of Power, which I think is really helpful. Because it's like, have you really thought about what power means to you? Like, how do you define it? How do you understand it? So what I was seeing, and what caused me to write the piece that became this book, was people who seemed relatively on equal playing field, equal level, maybe a slight raise of platform or slight raise of positionality, using this technology against each other and using it against each other for all manner of offenses. And I was having a hard time parsing it out. I'm like, is this a conflict? Is this someone who is causing harm, power down, power over? Is this someone who's an abuser and a repeat abuser? Has there been an attempt for a community accountability process or a transformative justice process? Part of it was like me, how do I navigate this as someone who's just receiving request in my box, like do this. And a lot of it was like, for myself, how do I understand what feels like a big hopelessness inside of movement, right? Because to me, the we just got to get rid of them is like, I don't believe you can change. That's how it feels to me.
A few years ago, I had a chance to interview Sarah Schulman, whose book is Conflict is Not Abuse, came out in 2014, I think. She had her definition of how they were different. How do you explain it?
That's great. So I put in here, because I was like, I can't quite find anything that maps out all of it. But for me, conflicts are disagreements, differences, or arguments between two or more people. It can be personal, political, structure. There may be power differences between the people. They can be direct or named, but it's fundamentally being held in relationship, right? And neither person is intentionally trying to cause harm, demoralize, shrink the other person's power, their strength, their safety. And then abuse is, to me, it's so distinct. So abuse is behaviors, including physical, emotional, economic, sexual, and more, that are intended to gain, exert, and maintain power over another person or in a group. And I think one of the big differences is how they can be handled. So I think conflict is something where you can bring in a mediator, or you can sit and have a really intentional conversation, active listening. What did you just hear? Conflict can be handled at that level, where we can come out of it with, what are the boundaries we need? What are the new practices we need? I need an apology. Like, conflict is at that level. Abuse often needs professional intervention and support, because it's not just about what the abuser is doing. There's a whole dynamic that is in play, right? There's participation of the person who's being abused. There is often, without realizing what's happening, like, abuse can be very sneaky and build up, and there's a lot of manipulation and gaslighting and other things happening. So, because most of us don't walk around seeing ourselves in a power dynamic where someone even can abuse us. I know for me, I'm like, I'm a powerful Black woman. No one's going to be abusing me. I was shocked. And I needed outside support for someone to recognize and help me see, like, that's what's happening right here and now. I also think one of the things that's important to name is that often the cycles that are happening in your personal and professional life overlap. And so I think that's how we can see abusive dynamics happening in our personal lives that are also reflecting abusive dynamics we are sustaining or putting up with in our professional lives. Yeah. And really being able to make the distinction where, like, this has gone beyond conflict. And this has gone beyond what I can see clearly myself. And sometimes I will say, as a mediator, I will be holding spaces and I'll recognize that it's actually an abuse scenario and not just a conflict. And it's also important in those, for me, I'll be like, I need to stop this. This needs a different level of help. This needs like someone who has therapy degrees and stuff like that. Right. And that also is about having some humility of like, I'm not going to mess y'all up by pretending I can hold something I can't hold. And you shouldn't mess yourselves up by pretending you can just get out of this without help. Abuse scenarios need support.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, one of the things I find so important about your work for all of us is the notion of mutability, that we could be in different roles with different people in different scenarios at one and the same time, and that we can move through identities and experiences. We're not forever marked abuser.
No,
victim.
often the role that we play is just a matter of function of time.
You can just hang in there long enough and learn enough and listen well enough. In talking about social media versus intergroup or interpersonal relations, what's the difference, or what changes the dynamic?
Well, I'm 42, so I sit in like a particular place inside of movement where when I was first coming into it, social media was not a way that we organized, didn't exist. And so your movement participation or your movement reputation was based on what you did on the ground. Do you have a base of people? Can you organize and move people? Or do you have some other tangible offer to make to people? And we were in the wake of COINTELPRO, right? So we had this constant sense of like, you don't trust the state and you don't set your people up to ever be vulnerable to the state.
COINTELPRO being in the counterintelligence program that the FBI mounted in the 60s and 70s against radical organizations, including Dr. King, people like that.
Exactly. And the idea of it, right, was instead of going head to head, right, we have a difference of opinion and we're going to fight it out. It was, we will sneak in and we will penetrate and we will make ourselves seem as if we are part of your group. And then we will gather data that the state can use against you. And we will also foment dissent and disagreement and divergence inside of your ranks. And so I came up very suspicious around that. I was like, I have to know that you are who you say you are. I have to know that I can trust you and count on you. And I learned that by being in person, in movement with you. So now we're in this new organizing environment where there's a lot of people who don't have any offline base, but they have a huge online base. And we're trying to contend with that. Where does that fit inside of this larger scheme? And I don't think we actually know all that yet. But when you talk about this culture of, oh, we can call people in, we can call people out. One of the things that happens, especially when we're first getting politicized, is we want to be able to make the difference. Like, I know this now. I understand feminism, okay? I am no longer transphobic. I am no longer this phobic. I'm no longer that phobic. And I think the calling out can function in some ways as a way of marking ourselves as belonging. Like, I belong. I can see the harmful behavior. I can see that mess. I'm no longer like that. And that happens. That's always happened. But now it happens at a much bigger scale with really different impacts. And so I'm really curious about what we do about that. And I'm really curious as an abolitionist, like, I identify as someone who I want to end the state of prisons. I want to end policing as a practice. I don't believe anyone is disposable. I do believe we are functioning inside of systems that create traumatic behaviors and traumatic practices and traumatic rhythms. And that it's part of our responsibility as a species is to figure out, how do we break those cycles of harm? How do we put ourselves back into relationships with each other where we can be accountable and where we can grow and where we can change and where we can understand that one of my teachers, Miriam Kaba, says we're not our worst day, right? We don't want to be judged our whole life based on our worst day's behavior. And I've gotten to hold a lot of people who were presented to me as monsters, were presented to me as irreparable. I've gotten to hold them and sit with them and sift down into the horrible things that happen to them that shape the behavior. So I feel maybe more hope than the average bear when it comes to some of these things. Like, I'm like, I do think if we give it time and space, healing is possible in most cases.
So let me ask you, you don't normally in your daily work
Yeah.
with political parties or traditional parties. And most of the people you're working with would have their problems with all the political parties that we have right now in office. But I do want you to address what a
Uh-huh.
lot of people around the country are probably grappling with right now, which was that this last election year was really rough. And
Very.
in my local paper, I'm in upstate New York, there was a blog post, actually, the paper's Facebook page, where Republicans said, you know, it's all very well for your Joe Biden now to be talking about coming together, but you all just spent the last 4 years vilifying the president we elected, trying to impeach him, calling us names, making fun of us at the Academy Awards. We're not going to forget that either. So, how do you grapple with that when it comes to power and what's conflict and what's abuse? Because there is behavior we need to call out.
Yes, and this is one of the things I feel like I learned in the process of this. Like I wrote an initial piece and got feedback for that piece, and in the feedback, people were like, "Can you be more precise?" Basically, like,
Mm-hmm.
"Can you be more clear about what you mean?" And it was so helpful for me because I was like, "Yeah, what do I mean? Like, what am I trying to get at here? Why does this feel so uncomfortable to me?" And I realized that it's because we're collapsing all these different things and acting like they should all get the same response. So one thing is conflict, political difference, right? I've been really working to bring into practice principled struggle and the idea that there are ways to be in conflict that still honor each other's humanity, that are still in right relationship with something much larger than ourselves, and that allow us to be self-responsible, right? Can this container actually hold what I need? Can I manage my emotions well inside of this space? Like, is this a space where I can actually grow? And so I'm like, okay, how do we be in principled struggle and in conflict? And I don't think the call outs are one of the ways we do that. And then there's also like contradictions, right? Where we're like, well, you act like you said this, but you're doing this, right? And trying to call those things out, which I'm like, okay, we can be in that practice. And we all, as human beings, have contradictions between what we say and what we do. That's very much our human nature right now. There's also misunderstandings, which I think happen a huge amount on the internet, where someone says something and it's out of context, or it's cross community in a way that lands in sometimes the misunderstandings just need an apology, not a cancellation. So it's like, how do we make the appropriate move? And part of why I say all this is because I want us to actually protect the strategy for use when it actually does need to be used. There are instances where we do have people who are serial abusers, who are causing sexual violence and harm in our communities, who are really deeply misusing their power, abusing funds. Like there's like serious, egregious things that are happening that we do want to be able to be like, this is something we do need to call out and intervene on and stop. And the power dynamics are such that we want to be able to use this strategy. I think we're all trying to get a little bit clear on like where does harm enter into the picture? The blog post that you just mentioned, I'm like, well, it's interesting to me, right? Because I'm like, that sounds like there's a huge political difference there. And for some people over the last 4 years, when people went low, they went high. And for some people, they were like, we're going to get down in the mud with you and like call you names and like make fun of you. And that's part of how we're going to survive this. And, we have this administration and presidency really created a mode of trolling as politics, farce as politics, like not taking it seriously, right? Really making it into who can have the best insult meme, like that's our political state.
And
So,
using social media to do it.
and absolutely using social media in ways I think I think it's going to take us a while to even understand how much we got played, right? Which is embarrassing to acknowledge, but we did not design these systems and we don't fully understand how they are working and how these algorithms are working and how it's all happening. So, there's humility required for the path that I'm suggesting, which is how do we be discerning? How do we understand that we don't have all the information? How do we understand that we've lost touch in some ways with what is truth? And we could get back into that practice. Actually, we need to get back into a practice of asking some questions, making sure we understand the groundwork, understanding power dynamics and being able to speak well about them and being able to fight fair. I want generative conflict. I think it's the only way we actually grow authentic relationships. So that's a big part of what this book is inviting people towards. It's like, learn to fight fair, learn to be in conflict directly and learn to set the boundaries that you actually need, that would make you feel safer, that would make you feel respected and protect your dignity. And in scenarios where there's survivors and harm doers, both of them, or all of them, they need community to help them move to the next phase of their healing work. So those are some of the things I'm trying to move towards.
There's a huge context in which we're operating. I don't know whether you have a copy of your book right there, do you? We would love you to read a little something.
Okay. I have had to choose life from deep within me. That's why I'm still here. I want to live. I want to live. I think everyone chooses each day to move towards life or away from it, though some don't realize that they're making that choice. Capitalism makes it hard to see your own direction. I'm writing this in July of 2020 from within the COVID-19 pandemic. As I have watched the world respond to the pandemic, the borders between nations shift meaning in my mind. I can see which countries choose life and which don't, which countries have a majority life-oriented citizenship, and which countries and regions elect leaders who they believe will care for them, which countries pivot at the highest governmental level to protect their people, to guide their people, to protect themselves. Places with a variety of economies and exposure have found ways to move towards life. And I have a footnote here that feels important, which is I'm aware that anti-abortion efforts have long staked a claim on being pro-life. I want to reclaim the language of choosing and orienting towards life for a much broader framework of choices and behaviors that align with long-term human existence. I do not think we should surrender language to those who misuse and denigrate the sacred spell inside of words. End of footnote. I wonder about the movements in those other countries, what it might feel like to live and organize in a place that truly orients towards life. I don't want to romanticize any human experiment. I know each country has its trade-offs, but what would it be like to have leadership able to admit being wrong when new information presents itself about the dangers around and amongst us? What would it be like to organize and apply pressure to a government committed to adapting such that the majority of its citizens stay alive rather than the stubbornness to stay the same? In our current context, it feels like movement has to push towards life against an avalanche of crisis energy that undermines a viable future. The US, as a nation, does not choose or love life, not in our policies, not in our safety practices, and not in our relationship to the planet and other nations. Not yet, and possibly never before. Other nations, many amongst the most developed in the world, initially shrugged at COVID-19. Then they adapted. The US response has been more egregious than a shrug. It has been a flagrant disregard, running towards a Category 5 pandemic tornado. It's meant that those of us who want to live are watching in horror as the mutating coronavirus fills in the pre-existing grooves of collective hopelessness and the resistance of those who love life. With climate deniers and corporate polluters on one side, environmental and climate justice movements on the other, white supremacists and patriarchs on one side, solidarity movements in race, ethnicity, class, gender, ability, and sexuality arenas on the other. We are a nation not just diverse or divided, but torn, pulled towards life and pulled towards death. When I get that torn feeling within, which in recent years comes very rarely in twinges and wisps, I now recognize it as a suicidal tendency in me. It's not the truth, not the only truth, not my truth, not the choice I want to make, but the tendency is wily, using the voices of people I love to make itself heard. I have to be vigilant, listen between the lines, ask who would benefit from my absence, who benefits from my self-doubt. Under our blustering, exceptional patriotism, our nation has a tendency towards its own destruction, a doubt of its right to exist, which is rooted in our foundation. It's a shame-filled foundation. Can we heal all the way down to the roots of this nation, especially if it's the only way we will want to go on? I think Our movements struggle inside this larger national hopelessness and overwhelming history of trauma and shame. We are combating that which we simultaneously internalize. We want to grow, but at the same time, some of us don't seem to believe we will all get there or get anywhere better in time, that we can't and won't put forth the effort. Maybe the idea of future generations experiencing peace and abundance is not quite enough to keep us going. Maybe we just need some more immediate signs of life. Maybe we are terrified.
Thank you. Do you think we can heal all the way down to the roots of this particular nation?
Well, I'm a post-nationalist. So, I don't feel as invested in having to do it as a nation as I do as a species and as communities. Like I said, I think the foundation is rotten at the core, and there's some healing work that a lot of people in this country would have to turn towards that they're currently like running away from. So a while ago, I decided that's not really where I want to center my work. I'm not running after racist Nazi patriarchs being like, come on, see my humanity. I'm just going to be over here being in my humanity and inviting those who are interested in examining and being in their own humanity and in our relationship to the planet to come and be in a conversation. And, we are one of the largest nations in the world. And I don't think there's a lot of proof that really large nations work well. I do think you get to a point where it's very hard to feel a center, a set of shared values, a set of shared concerns. And right now we're in a place of wildly divergent pulls and draws and concerns. And there's a lot of people who are steeped in a ton of misinformation. It's really hard to get a sense of how do we bring people back from the edge of conspiracy theory? How do we bring people back to a place where they think that governance can work and they're willing to practice governance? So I'm much more concerned right now with, I want to prepare as many people as I can to be in the work of governance, in the work of actually taking responsibility for democracy, in the work of actually taking responsibility for economy, in the work of actually taking responsibility for the future.
You talk about the narrowness of innocence.
Yes.
Does that relate to this?
Absolutely. I think that we all want to be innocent. We all want to be seen as innocent. And, when egregious things happen, when the police kill one of our people on the streets, we're rushing to make the case that that person was innocent instead of rushing to make the case that that person was human. And I think it plays out in so many ways. And whenever these call outs happen, I think, that person's weakness, their flaws have been uncovered and now everyone can see them. And the people calling them out, their flaws are unseen. It's not that they're innocent. It's not that they're better. It's not that they never made some of these same mistakes. It's like their stuff is still in the dark. That's how I often think of it. And my friend Prentice Hemphill writes about this really beautifully, has a piece on their website called Letting Go of Innocence. Maybe you can link it in the show notes or something, because I uplift it in everything I do. But it really talks about that because we're holding on to innocence, which is mythical. None of us have it. We're no longer children. We are adults. We are making mistakes. We are learning. And if we land in that, what it means to be mature is to relinquish the innocence and claim the full breadth of human potential emotion and action, to turn and face the potential monsters inside of ourselves and those internalized systems in ourselves. My mentor was Grace Lee Boggs. She said we must transform ourselves to transform the world. So I'm constantly looking inside myself. When I see a call out, often it makes me turn inward and be like, have I done something like that? Could I imagine doing something like that? In what conditions would I do something like that? How would I need to be held if I did something like that? And so on. I try to put myself in the shoes of everyone in that scenario that needs to heal. Because the survivor shoes come easy to me. I am a survivor. I understand how much space it's harder for me to understand to be in the role of an abuser. I don't know those shoes. That doesn't mean I could never know those shoes, right? Those seeds are planted in me. I'm working all the time to be the kind of human who doesn't go to that level. But I don't think of myself as above it. And I think we have to not think of ourselves as above each other, because that's how we end up with the prison system, Yeah. We think of those people as lesser than us when they are our teachers. So many of them are like, I'm learning and changing and growing and transforming. Don't keep me inside these walls.
Mm.
I think the same thing in our community. Like, let's make room for people to recover. And it's not the survivor's duty. That's one of the big things I want to make sure it's clear in this. I'm not saying survivors of abusers need to be like, now I have to make a huge space for that healing process. No, survivors, we need to be concerned with our own healing processes, and we need to be held in those for however long and however we need them. What I am saying is I don't think that our own survival gives us permission to destroy others. I think that it hopefully broadens our compassion for what harm can do, what trauma can do, what unhealed pain can do, can create. And as a community, right? Gwendolyn Brooks said that we are each other's magnitude and bond. Like, we are each other's business, you know? So it's like, how do we hold each other that way?
Mm. We're coming to the end, but I don't want to close without talking about your mycelium metaphor, which it seems to me speaks to what is going on at a subterranean level in us, I guess good and bad,
Yes.
but in our society right now, as we start another year after a year that was
Well,
really rough.
yeah,
Where do you look for transformation?
that's good news. I mean, we are an interdependent species. My friend Alexis Pauline Gum says that we are not individuals, right? We're always in relationship and connection. And once we understand that, I think we can begin to understand that you cannot transform or detoxify a system by removing one individual. You have to flood the system with something new. And I will say, I look to places where people are in the hard work of experimenting with working together, because it's not easy. Interdependence is not easy. If it was, we'd already be doing it, right? We've been trained to do other things, to compete and to try to be in hierarchy all the time. So I look at the rising majority. I look at the movement for Black lives. I look at Black organizing for leadership and dignity. I really pay attention to the experiments where people are saying, how do we take responsibility for ourselves and each other? I look at Black farmers who I think are really starting to figure out, what does it mean to be in a right relationship with land that was originally stolen and that we were forced to work. Many of us, many of our ancestral lines were like traumatically brought to this place. So how do we find a relationship with it and with the indigenous people who still are the rightful owners of it? That's when you start to really open up, like, let's not be pit against each other. How do we work together to figure this out? And how do we rise above that which is petty in ourselves? And that's some of the work that I see movement leaders, the movement leaders that I trust the most, that's what I see them doing, is being like, there's a petty way, there's a dismissive way, there's a way that I could be better than, and I'm not going to choose that. I'm going to choose a way that continues to challenge me to grow. I'm going to choose a way that allows me to learn in public. I'm going to choose a way that relinquishes perfection so that I can be part of something greater than myself.
That's one of the reasons we're interested in work around co-ops and in studying them and talking to people in co-ops. It's so fascinating. They always say, look, the word is work is hard, decision making is hard, all the rest is hard. What's really hard is learning how to make decisions together. Exactly. Because we're so taught to just vote once every 4 years and go with majority rule, but to actually try to come to decisions together is hard.
Yeah, I always say that too. It amazes me how much people expect to have an outcome that aligns with their values from such minimal participation in life, right? And it's a part of why I still mess with movements, you know, because I'm like, we don't have to participate in elections. We don't, right? We are participating every day in trying to shape and change everything. And I don't think it matters much if you participate in elections if you don't also participate in holding elected officials accountable, in tracking these systems and understanding what is happening and shifting at the local level. Like, and I've said that forever, you know, I'm just like, it's not the kind of game you play where you just pick a winner at the end. It's not the Olympics even, right? It's like, it's the only the Olympics that every single one of us is a competitor, right? And we're all running the race and we all have to hand off the baton together. It's one of those games where we either all play it or we all lose.
My last question, I guess, has to do with COVID-19. We are looking at a year of this pandemic in the world. How has it intensified both our best and our worst tendencies, or maybe in the reverse order?
I think, yeah, I'll go in the reverse. I think, and the worst tendencies, it's just impossible to do things well when we're exhausted and terrified. So I think that's the main thing I'm seeing, is that we're exhausted, we're terrified, and most of the stuff that's happening is out of our control. And so then our worst tendency comes out, like, here's something I can control, canceling you, here's something I can control, right? And I think it also has brought out the worst in that it makes the virtual world feel like the whole world, right? That we forget that it's still only a part of how we communicate, a part of how we practice being alive and being in community. So I think in those ways, it's like, ugh, I'm exhausted. It's 3 a.m. I couldn't go see my family. I haven't been held right for months. Like, and then this person just offended me. Fuck that person, like to that level. And I also think it's brought out the absolute best in care. I have seen incredible networks emerge of mutual aid. I have seen incredible work emerge where people are willing to step in and try to mediate and support and care for each other, because there's this real sense of things can change so rapidly, and all of a sudden 250,000 people are gone. Things can change so rapidly, and we've lost people in our movements. And I hope it continues to soften us and to make us humble that we're not completed projects. This is not a completed effort. And that's what, when I look at how many people are turning towards healing and care and treating each other well inside of our organizations and our movements, like, exhausted leaders don't make great decisions. Yeah. And when they don't make great decisions, that can lead to the call out stuff. But if we also pace ourselves and say, none of this has to be urgent in this way. Let's move to 4-day weeks. People are taking care of their children at the same time. Let's be family oriented. How do we always, always, always notice that we can be practicing our visions in the here and now? And I see that happening. I want to continue and encourage that happening.
That's beautiful.
Thank you so much for engaging with the book and having you just do the best interviews. So thank you.
Thank you. We kept you much longer than we promised, but I wanted to.